Hello and welcome to another episode of Surgeons Lives. I'm John Munson, your host. Today's guest is quite special from my perspective in that I've known John MacFie, Professor John MacFie, for the last 40 years or more since I first met him as a trainee in Leeds in England. He became highly successful in his professional life, culminating in being president of the Association of Surgeons of Great Britain and Ireland. We worked together when I was chairman of surgery in the UK in the University of Hull. For most of his life, he's had an interest in cars, some strange, some exotic, and he's going to talk to us about that today. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say and talking us through his interests. So let's see what he has to say and enjoy. I'm John Munson, and this is Surgeons Lives. So thanks for jumping onto this thing. I'm creating a series of these interviews with surgeons from both sides of the Atlantic, Ireland, England, some from Europe as well as the United States. And, you know, lots of people talk to surgeons about their lives as surgeons and surgery. And we'll cover some of your glittering career in that space as well. But also I'm just as interested in, the other aspects of the human beings. In the early days of your career, my career, we were used to surgeons who were very monochromatic, as in, for the most part, hobbies and other aspects, interests in life were not really discussed. I'm not sure that was a good thing. I'm sure there were many.
I think that's right.
What
I have written recently, surgeons of our generation were married to surgery to the exclusion of all else, which is
yes, exactly. So, what I'd like to do is, if it's okay by you, is if you were to start by just giving us a few words that start with the words "I was born in."
I was born in Newcastle upon Tyne, England, 1950. I was born and brought up in Northumberland. I lived in a village called Ashington, which is a coal mining village. My father was a general practitioner. I had three brothers. I went to school locally, and I went to school in Newcastle, which was my forte of education. My interests were scouting and rugby, and latterly girls.
Wow, and
so there you go. That's my first 20 years.
And so, what was the trigger to go into medical school and surgery?
Well, my father was a doctor. My grandfather was a doctor. My great grandfather was a doctor. My godfather was a doctor. We're a pretty medical family. I had, I suppose, narrow visions. I always thought I would do medicine. I thought I'd do surgery because none of them had done surgery. And I liked the hands-on aspect of that. I've always, now I'm retired, I find I do an awful lot of wood turning and carpentry. And I'm interested that my grandfather was a medic. He was a general practitioner in the northwest of Scotland. But he was also quite good at woodwork, and so he was a lay preacher. So he used to make the coffins for the local church, and I think that carpentry skill was useful in terms of a development in surgery.
And are you any good at it?
Well, that's for somebody else to say, not me. But it certainly provides me with gifts for birthdays and Christmas, which people seem to appreciate. I mean, of course, they'd be too polite to say otherwise.
But that's what you tend to make would be, I don't know whether the word would be knickknacks, but rather that than say a wardrobe or something like that. I mean, it's more smaller items.
Well, it's both. What I like is wood turning. So,
right.
If you make a fancy large oak or ash or tulip wood bowl, then people like that because they can put fruit in it or
Yeah.
whiskey bottles, whatever they want. I do make boxes and trinkets and knickknacks. They're quite nice. But I prefer the larger statements because I like to see the wood. I like the feel of the wood and the look of the wood. But that's what I enjoy. If if members of the family or friends say they want a bookcase or a cabinet, yes, I can turn my hand to that. But I
Right.
find it a bit mechanical and I have the tools and the stuff in my workshop to do that. But I like the wood turning because I like the wood. That's what I say.
Sure. Yeah. Well, before we spend further time talking about that, let's go back to your surgical career. You and I, do you remember the year we first met? Um,
Well, that must have been at Jimmy's, I presume, when Tom Brennan,
yes,
invited you over as a registrar. So that, and I must have been a senior registrar because I was
correct.
at Jimmy's. So I had finished my research. So I guess that must have been, I'm guessing now, John, 1980, 1981, something like that.
1984, actually.
Okay, right, okay. Oh
Um,
no, yes, you're right, of course, because I was appointed a senior registrar in 1980. So yeah, that
yeah,
would fit.
yeah. Yeah, so you were entering the phase that came to many, of course, in the training paradigm that existed then. You know, the phase, I should say, of the slightly time expired, embittered, and angry senior registrar. You know, looking for the job that you thought you deserved. And as I say, you were, there were many of such individuals around the UK at the time, and for some years to come. And if I recall correctly, even though it turned out to be an enormous success story, the job you ended up in Scarborough was not necessarily your first ambition. Is that a fair statement?
Uh, I think that's a fair statement. It has to be with the rider that it was the first and only job I applied for. Um, but I'd always thought I would stay in Leeds Infirmary, but the jobs never came up when I was around. I I I don't think I'd got quite embittered, as you say, but I certainly thought I'd got to a point when I was was ready not to be a junior doctor.
Mm.
And so I was offered a senior lectureship in New Zealand with Graham Hill, as you may recall. And it
Yeah.
was an opportunity to travel. And he was recently appointed chair in New Zealand. All he was trying to do was emulate what he'd had in Leeds. And it suited me because it was, in theory, a promotion. In theory, it was a different experience. It meant I took my family abroad for a year.
Yeah.
It was a very exciting year. And it opened my eyes to a different world of surgery, where, for instance, at the weekends you weren't on call. In Leeds, the ethic was you were permanently on call, as you will well remember. In Leeds, if you'd operated on a patient, then you were looking after that patient until they went home. You were permanently on call.
Yeah.
When I went to New Zealand, it was eye-opening. They said to me on my first weekend when I went in there to get lost, go away, what are you doing here? So that was a real education. So I was ready to move on, but I'd always thought I would take Jeff Smitty's job at infirmary, but it never came up. And so a job in Scarborough came up, which had certain significant disadvantages, but it had certain advantages. You were a big fish in a small pond. The place had a track record of research. It's a nice place to live to bring up children. You have a much nicer property to live in, and you're much wealthier. So there were lots of things to be said for it.
And I mean, you always had say a little bit about that in terms of you had a very strong academic profile, and something that you maintained against all odds. As you say, your predecessor in Scarborough had established, if you like, it had broken the mold to some extent by establishing a fairly strong research productivity from a community or district hospital. It's easier to do that in the environment of a large academic medical institute with infrastructure and backup and support. But so you manage this, and talk a little bit about how to do that for younger folks who might be listening to this.
Well, I don't envy the younger folks because I think that they have a mountain to climb if they want to do. I mean, I think I did have a mountain to climb, but setting up a research establishment in a district general hospital, not a teaching hospital, Scarborough was a challenge. But I had a great advantage that I had extremely good colleagues, particularly medical gastroenterological colleagues, and I learned very rapidly. And I know it's a truism, but teamwork is absolutely essential. So I worked with a consultant physician called Charles Mitchell, and within a very short time, we had collared all the patients with regards to colitis, Crohn's colitis, as well as colorectal malignancy. And we worked together. And so his registrars and my registrars worked together. And within 2 or 3 years, we'd established ourselves as a research unit. And that meant that registrars in the area in Yorkshire wanted to come to us, even though we were a district general hospital. So I think I was moderately successful, but I think one of the reasons for that was having very good colleagues. We were then successful in getting grant money. And as you will well know, you've got to have money. And so in those days, we had the Yorkshire Regional Health Authority. And we got, I don't know, I can't remember. Certainly £250,000, £500,000 from various grants out of the Yorkshire Regional Health Fund for various projects that we did. And then we developed a collaboration with the University of Bradford, with a university friend of Charles Mitchell's. So we then had PhD students. So it became a self-fulfilling business of our research. We evolved the combined gastroenterology service, Charles and I, and then also Bradford. We had research fellows that were funded by money from university grants. And once you start producing papers and producing good original research, it feeds on itself. And we were producing far more original papers than equivalent academic units in the north of England. But I have to say, if this sort of video is going out to others, I don't envy people who are going into surgery now. I would not recommend that they go to a district general hospital because the bureaucracy of research and the maddening treacle-like attitude of research committees and ethics committees would cause anybody to tear their hair out. I mean, towards the end of my time in research, we had major problems with York, under whose auspices we came. They were a massive restraint on research.
Yeah.
They without question reduced our output in the last few years. So I think these days people should go to a larger centre. I think I was fortunate, and I don't think you can repeat that now.
One of the questions I ask people towards the end of these conversations is, looking back over their career, they will have seen major changes in, the professional life, surgery, some for the better and some for the worse. And what do you think has been the biggest change for good in surgery in the last 40, 50 years that you've seen?
I think the biggest change for good is that we have much more appropriate audit, a much more appropriate analysis of outcomes and results. And I think that is a good thing. I think the biggest change for the worse is that, and I'm not crying to go back, it's gone, is the lack of the absence of the firm that were all brought up in, the consultant, senior registrar, SHO.
Yeah.
When you were on the firm, you knew where you were and you had all these people that you related to. And that's gone now for a whole host of reasons. But when you and I were being trained, you know, I can remember my first night as a senior registrar. My first night as a senior registrar in Leeds Infirmary, a patient's admitted with a ruptured aortic aneurysm. You've had no training in vascular surgery. I mean, you've seen a bit, you've done a bit, and you do your best, and the patient dies. And the next morning, I'm talking to a senior guy, I won't say, well, ruptured aneurysm, 82 years of age, could have died, doesn't matter. Well, it does matter. And you could get away with things in 1980 because things like that didn't matter. So I think that's the big change now. I think that when you take relatively uncommon conditions, be it carcinoma of the pancreas, carcinoma of the rectum, ruptured aortic aneurysm, the results now are much better than they were when I was a trainee.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
The bad thing is we don't treat the common things as well. So we tend to centralize, and that means the patient gets a less good deal. So, if you take appendicitis or I don't know, similar medical conditions, it's ludicrous, as has happened with I had to do an investigation in Manchester recently. Manchester Royal Infirmary refused to take children under a certain age because they need to go to the children's hospital. Well, that's ludicrous. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah. Mm.
So there you go. I think specialist care is better. Generalist care is not as good.
So when I was intrigued by the documents that you sent me in advance, and thank you for that. I think we should probably skip over your brief, but no doubt glamorous ownership of a multi-purpose Bedford van as one of your first modes of transport. But when you drove your family to Scarborough to start this new adventure, what did you drive in?
Drive 2000, straight six.
So not the 2.5 liter one. No.
No, no.
But, yeah. And so what was your I think you've said that you've always been interested in cars, etc. What was it about cars? Was it the noise, the smell, the style, the mechanics, the glamour, all of the above, none of the above?
Oh, I like all of the above, but I like the mechanics when I was 16 or 17. I used to have cars parked on my parents' drive, which I used to tinker with and play with. First car I bought was cheap as chips, and I think it was. I think cars in that time were a manifestation of independence.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it is, as you say, it's part of that's an age thing because you're talking best part of half a century ago, and they were still they were still a critical component of independence. Being able to travel further, further and wider. You've had quite a few.
In those days, when I was 17, I was living in a small mining village, which was 20 miles from the city centre, Newcastle. If you wanted to have a social life, you needed to have a car.
Yeah.
And particularly since I'd been sent to school in Newcastle, all your friends were in Newcastle. So having a car was absolutely critical. Having a driving license was critical.
Well, you went through your biker phase as well, didn't you? I think.
Yeah. I had two bikes. I had a Honda 50 and a Norton 500 Dominator 7. Yeah.
Bit of a difference.
Yeah. Well, I only had the Honda to pass the test. That was the only reason I had that. I bought the Honda for tuppence halfpenny and sold it for threepence halfpenny. I mean, it was a horrible machine, but it was a means to an end.
Yeah, a lot of people rode those little Honda 50s with the semi-automatic gearbox, no clutch and the rocking gear
pedal.
Yeah, exactly. So you've had quite a selection of cars. Can you think back of a car that was impressively disappointing for you when you bought it, and
Yeah,
one that
yeah. The
surprised
biggest,
you good?
no, I think the biggest disappointment car at my time was the R32 Volkswagen Golf. It
Ah,
was a dreadful car.
what was dreadful about it?
Well, it had no charisma. It
Yes.
was, as I said to you, it was a hairdresser's car. It was a nominal four-wheel drive, but it wasn't really. It was an optional wheel drive, and it just looked like a Golf. And it was an awful car. It, it, I mean, I had it for 4 months or 5 months. I sold it on eBay. Um,
And did
the
you, what about a car that was surprised you or shocked you in that it was so good?
I think the answer to that would be I had a 6 Series 635 CSI BMW, which I leased. I'd had a long run of BMWs. I was very fond of BMWs, but for various reasons, I got this 6 Series. I can't remember the details now, but I was persuaded to lease it rather than buy it. And I remember driving this big black beast home. It was diesel. I'm thinking,
Diesel.
diesel.
Diesel. I have to say that twice.
It
Um,
was diesel. It was diesel. And the torque in this car was quite phenomenal. And I had it for 3 years. It was on a lease, and I was very sad to see it go. It was a superb car, and I thought it looked beautiful. It looked like an Aston Martin, actually, the front of it. But it was a magnificent car. Long journeys, motorway driving, economically in the snow. Everybody says they're terrible in the snow. You put a tractor weight in the back of a BMW 6 Series, brilliant, fantastic.
you did, of course, scratch your, your midlife crisis or mature life crisis with an actual Aston Martin.
Well, I was. I think I was too old for my midlife crisis by the
Yeah.
time I got Aston Martin. I I decided to get my Aston Martin shortly after the BMW went, and I got a Vantage V8 4.8. It was a beautiful car. It's unquestionably, in my view, the most beautiful car that's around. As you know, it was based on the DB7. Ian Callum designed it. It's an absolutely magnificently designed car. I mean, as a car, the noise was wonderful.
Yes.
In terms of the utility, it's appalling. You
Yeah.
can't put your dog in it. You can't put your golf clubs in it. Not that I play much golf. It's very, very low. My wife Pam wasn't that. She quite liked the Rory when went out for dinner, but was not that keen on it. She never wanted to drive it. I got it serviced once a year, and they used to be obsessional about this scratch or that scuff or whatever else. So I'd had it after I'd had it for 3 or 4 years. I was not sorry to see it go.
Yeah. They of course, I mean, not if you buy it secondhand, but most definitely if you buy them new, they do have a terrible record of depreciation. Um,
Well, mine didn't appreciate. I mean, we were out for dinner with some friends, and quite literally over the dinner, I said, "Oh, I'm thinking of selling the Aston." This chap said, "How much do you think of selling it for?" And I said, "I'm thinking of selling it for 43,000." I bought it for 53,000. He says, "Well, I'll have it." Never had to tell.
that just shows the benefit of going out with rich friends, hanging around rich friends. So back to some stuff about surgery and what was your when you were entering surgery, what was your ambition? What did you think you would be? What did if somebody, that question that people say, where are you going to be in 20 years? What did you want to be?
I'm not sure. Uh, I'm not sure I know the answer to that. On a very mundane note, I can remember when I was appointed senior registrar in 1980, going on holiday to a very cheap hotel with my wife Pamela and three little children, and taking, I think it was Farquharson's textbook of surgery or some such dreadful
Yes.
term, and looking at the anatomy of the stomach and the colon thing. I just do not understand the relationships between stomachs and colons and pancreas, and I'll never ever understand this. And I remember thinking, I would really like to understand how all this works. I didn't. I didn't. I didn't say to myself I wanted to be a professor of surgery or a consultant surgeon. I just wanted to succeed in what I'd set out to do, and I wanted to. I wanted to. I wanted to do research to prove that that I was not an ulcer rat.
And that's interesting. You wanted to use that as a way of, I don't know, affirmation that you're real, as you say. I guess is that maybe the opposite of an imposter syndrome, but you really want to demonstrate. Why did you think you needed to do that?
I hadn't realised that this conversation was going to be so in depth about me. I thought we were going to be talking about cars.
It's both.
And I've not had any conversation with you about you. You know, I um, I failed the 11 plus, and I never thought I'd be successful.
Right. Yeah.
I had a very successful elder brother, so forth.
Yeah.
I never thought I'd be successful. I started at a younger age, feeling I had to prove myself above and beyond.
Which you did, of course.
I was quite, I was quite determined to show that what we had here was better than average.
Yeah.
It was good, and I wanted to have a unit that attracted people in because it was better than average. And I retired 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm very content with my retirement because I feel as though I achieved what I set out to do.
So one of the questions again that I often ask people in these conversations is, how would you, and I'm able to say this to somebody who of course is still with us, but how would you like to be remembered, number one? And number two, how do you think you will be remembered?
I'd like to be remembered by all the research fellows and trainees that came through who said that they both enjoyed themselves and learned a lot. And I still see the keys. It always that gives me a great big kick. And they I don't know whether you know, but it gave me an enormous kick that they decided that you remember the Leeds Regional Surgical Club?
Yes.
Well, they've renamed the prize for the Leeds Regional Surgical Club. It's now the MacFie Research Prize. I was dead chuffed about that.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't happen last year because of COVID, but so that's what happened. And that gives me a great deal of pleasure. That nothing, I'm not bothered about anything else. People write to me about the various papers and so forth, but the fact is they remember their time here, they remember their research, remember their MDs, and that to me is the biggest kick.
And it is because it is about people, isn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about people. And my former mentor in Dublin used to say, "Seeing as none of us are geniuses in this room, you should remember that you'll only be remembered by your patients and your students." And that is right. Your fellows, your research staff, your students, whatever it might be. I think that is right. That's your legacy, isn't it?
That's the legacy is the people that you looked after when you were the boss and they were coming through. That's the legacy.
Who are your mentors?
Also the satisfaction.
Yeah. Who are your mentors or role models? Do you have names that jump out at you?
Oh yeah. Certainly. Yeah, I mean, I think there are three names that would go to my grave saying were mentors. I mean, first there's Jeff Smitty. I've got a photograph on my wall here of Jeff Smitty. I was a junior registrar with him and then a senior registrar, and I got very well with him, and I think he got well with me. And then there was John Gallagher, who I worked with for a year. I tried to emulate his surgical technique because he did everything the same way. I thought that was great. And then I have to say, although you'll take the mickey out of me, I have to say Peter Lee was a great mentor. He was only 4 or 5 years older than me, but I first came across Peter when he was the lecturer with Gallagher when I was the junior registrar. And he taught me a great deal. He taught me kindness. He taught me how to people, and he taught me good fun. And I've, as you know, I've kept in touch with Peter, and I've got his photograph in my room somewhere as well. So those are my three great mentors, I would say.
Yeah, and I agree. Peter teaches life skills in his own inimitable way. He's remained a great friend to me, of course. And of course, I mean, we all have mentors and we all have characters. I mean, Jeff Smitty, for example, was quite a character, I think. I think he would be fair to say, as indeed was, of course, the late lamented Tom Brennan, who was
of course,
a remarkable individual who really, looked after the people from his homeland and many others. Extraordinary.
Just a remarkable man. That died far too young. A great loss.
Yeah, for sure. So now, back as you will relieve you from the psychiatrist chair for a moment, to take you back to. You've always been a bit of an Austin Healey fan, haven't you? Do you still have the red Healey?
No, the Healey went some years ago. I've got a picture out for you. Leslie, they have made this for you. And that was the Healey when I imported it from the States. I had the Healey for some years. It was good fun. But I don't miss it either. In the day case unit, I was doing a vasectomy on a patient. And as you know, you make small talk when you're doing these things. And I'll never ever forget this guy. And I'm just about to put the local anesthetic in, as you do. And I said, just a small prick. And this guy says, it might be small, but I've had a lot of fun with it. So, I fell about laughing. And I thought, my goodness. Anyway, I said, I got chatting to this guy. Turns out he imports Austin Healey's from the States. That's his job. And you can look him up. It's Murray Scott Nelson in Scarborough. The garage is still here. And so, to cut a long story short, I said, next time you bring in a Mark III, BJ8 Austin Healey, I'd be interested. So I got a 1964 BJ8 Mark III Austin Healey. It was left-hand drive. It was fine. And then I had them do a bottom-up restoration. And it gave me great fun for, 10 or 15 years. Great fun. But then as you get older, you don't want to get underneath it when the petrol pump fails. You need to get your hammer out and knock it. And it's no fun when the rotor arm fractures. So I know that's a sign of age and it's pathetic, but so it's gone. So I'm glad I've had that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I do, as you know, have a few old Jaguars, and they are all properly restored, etc. But most importantly, I have ensured that they've all had some little modern upgrades so that I don't have to experience the full joy of vintage motoring, which is normally associated with being on the side of the road with a vague smell of fuel. So they have electronic ignition and brakes that actually stop the car and such like, and radiators that are designed for something more than a chili Scarborough day, you know.
Yeah.
So, if you had an open checkbook and just for fun and giggles and frippery, what would be your dream car?
Well, I think I'd have an Aston Martin again because I just think they're so beautiful.
Yeah.
It's not practical. I'm driving home this afternoon with my wife. We passed a Triumph Vitesse convertible British Racing Green, which is just like the car we had when we
Yeah.
got married.
Yeah.
I said to my wife, I'll go and offer him some money. She said, it's just not worth it. It would be money down the drain. But as a frippery, I'd have one of them. But you know, if you got into a 1966 Triumph Vitesse now, it would be just simply awful.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. No. No. For sure.
And I think if I had 50 grand, I'd go and buy one of these upgraded Austin Healey's, you know, with the electric windows, disc brakes, new transmission.
So I asked somebody recently, a surgeon in the US, um, when he was going to retire. It wasn't a threatening question, you understand, but and how he would make that decision. And specifically, I was asking him, you know, where he stood on the balance between, as happens, for example, in the UK and other countries, a mandatory retirement at 65 versus what I refer to as the Michael DeBakey model, somebody who was still operating in his 90s. You're, as you've said, you're currently enjoying your retirement with lots of hobbies and interests. What's your spin on retirement? Early retirement has been a big issue in the UK for more than 20 years because of various levels of dissatisfaction. What's your comment on that?
Well, I'm not sure about the US. I'm not now familiar with the situation, but in the UK, I think we, I think we look after people coming toward the end of their career in an appalling way, not just because of pension arrangements, which are a massive detriment to staying in work, but also in terms of the skill set. I think that it's outrageous that people should stay on call after the age of 60-ish, you know, give or take. We can argue that. But I just don't think people at the age of 60 should be getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning and doing on call and then pursuing further things the following day. I think, though, that those people we should live in a society whereby those people can be adequately remunerated for continuing to make their contribution, be it in education or administration, or indeed in elective surgery. So I was very, very lucky. When I was 64 or 5 or something like that, I came off the on-call rota. I had very, very good colleagues. I don't know whether you remember them, John, Marcel Gatt and Claire McNaught and people like that. And so I used to go into theatre and we'd always operate as a pair, which I think is, you know, really good. I think it's good for them. I think it was good for me. I used to do the C-pod list, you know, and I enjoyed that because, you know, doing emergency surgery is great, particularly if you're not been up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
I used to go in at 8 in the morning, you see the patient and operate. So that was using me. So I retired when I was 68 or 69, which is old in this country.
Yes.
But just since you're asking me these questions, I was so vexed by these issues. And I was also very vexed by the fact that I think we have a litigious situation in the UK, and I think you probably have in the US as well. And I had a few experiences in my last 10 years, which I felt were absolutely appalling, in which people I did not respect clearly went out of their way to try and do me down. And so I had run-ins with the GMC and run-ins with York Trust and run-ins with various people, all of which was satisfactorily resolved. But as a consequence of all this, I felt very strongly that there was no organisation set up to help surgeons. Now, of course, the public don't relate to that because they think surgeons are all, well paid and well off, and by and large they are. But I felt we needed an organisation to look after surgeons. So 6 or 7 years ago, I spent a lot of time and I set up an organisation called the Confederation of British Surgery, which I'm very pleased to say 5 years ago was recognised in British legislation as a recognised trade union. So there are now only 3 trade unions of medical people in the UK. One's the BMA, one's the Hospital Society Consultants Association, and now we have the Confederation of British Surgeons, CBS. The BMA are useless because they're committed to primary care, and they're a left-wing organisation that are not, in my view, primarily concerned with the patient. HCSA have been around for 20, 25 years and haven't achieved anything. Federation of British Surgery, we've now existed for 3 or 4 years. I was the inaugural president. We now have an executive, and I've demitted. We have an administrative manager. We have 300 or so members. And our remit is to look after surgeons in trouble.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're doing. And so we're having an increasing number of people coming to us who are in trouble. And this isn't just trouble, GMC negligence type trouble. It's trouble with their trusts with regards to contracts. So today a surgeon contacts me. He has no office, no computer, no car parking facility. And so the argument is if he's not provided with the resources to do his job, how can he do his job?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you asked me, where am I in terms of surgery? Well, I've come to the end of my career. I've set up CBS. I hope that it will be successful. That's my legacy.
I was just going to say, that's the word I would use for it. I had a transient, but quite shocking exposure to this while I was still working in the UK, and I'm sure you will remember because it was a fairly infamous case where a surgeon who was indeed guilty of negligence, I don't think there was any doubt about that, but who was charged with murder.
Oh, yes.
And,
Yeah, I know the case, yeah.
it struck me that, and he was acquitted of murder really on a technicality, and which of course was quite right because I commented at the time in the media that if you make a mistake or you're negligent or whatever, deemed to be negligent, you deserve to have sanctions. But being jailed for life means that nobody will ever operate on any patient again, and that's ridiculous. Even the negligent surgeon does not set out to kill a patient. And I when I was in the States then, years later in the States, there was, of course, the case of David Sellow that was really, I thought, quite outrageous. There should be a separation between such criminal sanctions and professional sanctions, in my opinion, because of the implications. But the UK has, in fact, I think, become a little worse than the United States in that regard.
Yeah, I think it has too. But I think in that regard, the issues there, the David Sellow case is critical in this regard because there is no doubt, and I don't want to advertise this, his care was not great.
Sure.
And there were aspects of his care that you and I would not approve of. But the problem was that when it came to the court case, the expert witness for the prosecution referred repeatedly in his evidence to gross negligence. Mm-hmm. The then judge took this on board. Now, actually, in medical legal terms, there is no definition of gross negligence. And the judge and the jury were influenced by this.
Yes. Yeah. No,
he has subsequently been acquitted, but he's been acquitted on a on matters of process rather than on matters of fact. So no one's saying that what he did was right, but they're saying it did not amount to gross negligence because that was not defined. Anyway, without wanting to get into that, the relevance of all that case to me personally was it emphasized to me, as I had felt when I was reported to the GMC, the inadequacy of expert witnesses.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's been my watchword in my retirement, is to do something about the inadequacy of expert witnesses. And if this was not being videoed, I would sit here and I would relate to you 3, 4, 5 names of people that you will well know who have been retired for 10 or 15 years, who are expounding on robotic surgery or laparoscopic surgery, and they've never done it. And this is simply appalling. And it's not fair on the patient.
Well, we are lucky that we are in fact videoing it, so that you and I can stay out of it. As a friend of mine says, I'll do many things for you, but I will not wear an orange jumpsuit for you. All right, John. It's great to talk to you. I'll let you go, and good to see you. We'll talk to you again when we have it done.
Great to see you, John.